Welcome. My name is Grandma Storm. I write stories for young adults. Today I am reading chapters 46 through 50 in my book, The Book of Faith. "46. What have we this morning?" sighed the dear Queen in a peevish whine, as two brown leathers wheeled her into the dear Queen's Royal Collection and Redistribution Center. Dozens of ragged accountants perched atop high stools behind tall desks, surrounded by tumbles of ledgers. Around them stood towers of cracked crocks, mountainous mounds of moth-eaten mittens, precarious piles of jarred pickles, huge balls of old string, piles of spent candle ends, rusty bales of wire, innumerable old hats, various widgets, and vast quantities of whatnots. "The people adore you, dear Queen," chorused the army of accountants. "These gifts lay before your great statue as an expression of their love for you." The dear Queen yawned, exposing her fangs. "Dear Queen, bless us with wisdom for classification," declared the first accountant. "Bless us with insight for redistribution," chorused all in attendance. The daily sifting began. "First item," sighed the dear Queen as she itched the red scalp beneath her double-crowned hat. "2 teacups, slight crack in the second one. Good quality, I recognize the maker's mark," commented the first accountant. "Give it here," barked the dear Queen. The first accountant handed the teacups on a silver tray studded round with agates. "Nice, except for the crack. Put them in the collections under third best teacups. Note the blue flowers decorating the rim. Assign it to a subgroup." "Yes, dear Queen," chorused the Royal Academy of Accountants. "A length of rope, not too worn," observed the first accountant as he presented it on the silver tray. "I will be the judge of that," spat the dear Queen, her bleary eyes boring through the man. "You take on airs with your puffed-up opinions. First, the teacups are of good quality, then the rope is not too worn. I will decide what is what." "Praise be to the dear Queen," chorused the Royal Academy of Accountants. "Forgive your humble servant," begged the first accountant, falling to his knees and clasping his hands. "Maybe," rasped the dear Queen. Rising on trembling legs, the first accountant rearranged the rope on the silver platter. At his first step, he tripped. The platter slipped and clattered to the floor. A collective gasp issued from the Royal Academy of Accountants. The first accountant fainted. "Well, that is convenient," huffed the dear Queen. "Take this useless body out of my sight. Let it be noted in the records that the first accountant volunteered to serve me in the camps. Further, he donated the possessions of his house to be distributed by the Royal Academy of Accountants." Brown Leathers picked up the man and hauled him away. Dozens of quills scratched away over pages of accounting books recording the dictates of the dear Queen. "Had he a wife? Any sons or daughters?" inquired the dear Queen with a glint in her eye and a knife in her voice. Dozens of heads kept their eyes to their ledgers. "I said," screamed the dear Queen, "had he sons or daughters?" One trembling hand went up. A brown leather grabbed the volunteer and hustled him to the dear Queen. "Dear Queen, I recall a notation made several years ago. The former first accountant of the Royal Academy, did have one child. I believe it entered the collections at that time. Shall I find the entry for the dear Queen? Oh, really? You say a child entered into the royal collections? Yes, find that entry. The man ran to his desk and rifled through ledgers. It is cross-referenced several times, observed the man. Shall I require my fellow accountants to record the information? Yes, do. We must be proper about this. The room erupted into a flurry of fluttering ledgers. Brown Leathers selected random books for inspection. The dear Queen made comments on improving accounting principles. The ragged men hurried back to their desks to write her insights in their books of the Royal Academy of Accountants, Accounting and Auditing Practices. When all was settled once more, the dear Queen inquired, "And the rope?" No one stepped forward. "Oh, of course, we need a first accountant. You there," motioned the dear Queen with a bony finger ringed in jewels. "You that found that entry, you shall be first accountant." With solemn dignity, the ragged man slipped from his stool, puffed out his chest, and strutted to the first accountant's desk. "And the rope," snapped the dear Queen. "Note thickness, length, material used, degree of wear, estimated age, probable origins, suggest worth." A buzz of activity ensued as accountants registered the required data in appropriate ledgers. There was a bit of controversy concerning the estimated worth, but the new first accountant exhibited his skill by assigning the rope the highest possible value. The first accountant, with great ceremony, placed the rope on the silver tray, and with a flourish presented it to the dear Queen. "Assign this rope to the royal collection of useful articles," ordered the dear Queen. "One never knows when one might need a length of rope that is slightly worn. Now then, first accountant, how do you like my hair today?" The newly minted first accountant flushed. To speak the truth of the dear Queen's infected skull, sporting gray wisps, was a ticket to the camps. To take their eyes off the dear Queen would betray his ignorance. So, with an elaborate bow before the dear Queen, he turned his head upside down for a glance at the new portrait hanging behind him. With a flourish, he resurfaced and declared, "My dear Queen, the fairest of fair locks are thine, pure as liquid gold, framing a face of rare beauty and rarer youth, and the green dress declares perfect taste in fashion." "Yes," the words slid from the dear Queen's flickering tongue, "that is exactly right. I think you will make a fine first accountant. Stow the rope. Next." "A jar of pickles pig's feet, dear Queen." A small committee of accountants carried the analyzed, measured, and documented rope to a door at the rear of the Royal Academy of Accountants. As the teacups before it, it was handed to another little man in worse tatters than the accountants. He handed it to another, who handed it to another, who handed the rope to a man standing by a heap. With a practiced swing, he threw it onto the pile. The rope hit the blue-flowered, good quality, slightly cracked teacup, adding a fresh chip. This went on for 3 hours. The pile in the hall of the Royal Academy of Accountants did not diminish as new gifts were added. There was always tomorrow. But tonight was the eve of the time of congregation. Dr. Luce slipped in to remind the dear Queen of a certain ceremony which required her presence. She hissed. "47. The ladies in waiting breathed a sigh of relief as Tirzah entered the dear queen's royal apartments, but their eyes cast her accusing looks. She dismissed them with a shrug. She swept past and went directly to a wheelchair behind a golden frame. She arranged her skirts, placed a crown on her head, and sat. She allowed her face to relax, removing all expression. A minute later, an entourage of courtiers entered, following another wheelchair as it was muscled through the doorway by two brown leathers. It was rolled in front of Tirzah. In the wheelchair hunched the dear queen's bloated form. Tirzah, tall, slender, fair of face, lithe of form, and favored with the blush of youth, looked directly into a red, scabbed face. It stared back with eyes like those of a diseased cat. The bleary orbs bulged from a swollen head covered in gray wisps. The nose was short, pushed into the skull. No chin. The mouth was a slit framed by reddened skin on fire with an ill rash. On the low brow sat a diamond-encrusted crown, just like Tirzah's. The bony fingers were bejeweled just like Tirzah's. The dress was just like Tirzah's, only enlarged to accommodate the dear queen's overflowing mass. The dear queen raised her left hand to her face. Tirzah raised her right hand, copying the gesture exactly, only opposite. Boring, rasped the dear queen. As she spoke, Tirzah's lips moved in time with the thin, cracked lips. The head turned to the side. Tirzah matched the movement. I do not like my hair, cackled the dear queen. Tirzah's soft pink lips mimed the words. Her eyes met the dear queen's gaze. Veiled maids, identically dressed in black gowns, rushed to the sides of both the hunched creature and Tirzah. One knelt before the figure in the wheelchair, the other before Tirzah. What is your wish, dear queen? It shall be performed, spoke the maid, kneeling before the bloated lump. The other before Tirzah moved as the first maid, only as a mirror image. Oh, I don't know. I'm bored with long blonde hair. Can't really do anything interesting with it. I think the softening effect of curls would be more attractive. Tirzah harmonized with each of the monster's gestures, mimicking each motion with a practiced dexterity. I want brown curls, whined the dear queen in a petulant tone. No, bald, start a sensation. The dear queen focused her rheumy eyes on the ladies in waiting, noting the blonde wigs on all their heads. My dear queen, you alone are our ideal. Of course we desire to emulate you in all ways, voiced one. Oh, dear queen, a bald head would be more sanitary, declared another. I so admire the sage's suggestion. It would allow more hair to the scalp. I am sure we would all think more clearly without the nuisance of hair on our heads. Certainly you, dear queen, lead us in all ways of fashion and innovation. Think of the time we would save every day without the bother of hair, enthusiastically proclaimed another. More time to serve you, oh, my dear queen. Oh, sweet dear queen, sang another, flinging herself before the wheelchair, yet careful to keep out of scope of the golden frame. Beauty is perfected in your eyes. You know what is best for your ladies. The dear queen laughed out loud. She howled. She rocked back in her wheelchair and cackled. Tirzah mirrored each motion. Whack it off, screamed the dear queen. The marking of the tear under Tirza's eye reddened, but she did not flinch. She copied the enraged face before her and stared into the dear queen's eyes. The maids ran to fetch knives. Tirza's maid raised the white blonde braids to the blade. The dear queen's maid tugged at the thin wisps on the skull of the dear queen. The fiend glanced about at the faces of the ladies in waiting. They looked sick. Oh, never mind, spat the dear queen. You all bore me. The queen's maid dropped the gathered wisp. Tirza's maid echoed the action. Stop being so stupid and get my wig, shrieked the dear queen as she slapped her maid. Tirza slapped her maid at the same moment, only she hit the woman harder. The dear queen smirked. So did Tirza. The maids rushed to comply, each returning with a gold ribbon wig. They coordinated their movements. One pulled the wig over the red, scabby scalp, while the other hid the white, blonde braids. The eyes of the dear queen and Tirza remained locked. Enough, barked the dear queen. It is time. With that command, the brown leathers turned the wheelchair away from the golden frame. The dear queen exited as she had entered, with courtiers in train. The ladies in waiting filed out behind her. The door closed. Tirza slouched in the wheelchair and sighed. The maid walked over and gave her a good slap. 48. Meditations of the dear queen as she was wheeled to the great hall. She felt comfortable, almost. The cool weather of the season of frost soothed the fiery rash that inflamed her skin. Drippy gray days and long black nights were her favorite time of year. Heat made her itch. She could be a bit testy in warm weather. Maybe she would shave her head then. She felt secure, somewhat. Despite the minor problem with the first accountant, the session with the collection went well. The thought of her growing compendia instilled a comforting sense of protection. She just needed to collect a little more. One never knew what the future might hold. She felt in control. Maybe. She and Dr. Luce went to the temple for the necessary ceremonies to welcome the eve of the time of congregation. The darkness liked it. The sisters' dark matter and dark energy purred their approval. The prince was placated, for now. Hot spots fired in her brain. Bloody wig. She was only keeping the peace, mollifying allies, petting prickly prides. Dr. Luce said he only did it because it was necessary. But she knew he liked it. The little ceremony gave him powers. What did she get out of it? The whole thing drained her. It always stole her favorites from her collection of dollies. She sighed. She rather liked her current mirror. Her reflection rarely looked better. Well, there was that red-haired period. She felt sure she wanted to be a redhead. She confided in Dr. Luce. He told her his only desire was for her happiness, which was perfectly right, of course. He secured a red-haired reflection. She loved it for a while, but found red hair clashed with her favorite gowns. She spat. Besides, that reflection was slow, so that mirror was tossed aside. Rather sad. Some of the best paintings were during the red-haired phase, all tossed out. There were other inspirations. She even tried gray ones, thinking it would look like silver. Those paintings were horrid. Being a cool blonde was refreshing, Her skin was soothed when she'd looked in the mirror. Yes, she liked the white blonde look. All her gowns looked fabulous. The pageant of progress and the celebration of development parades were as expected. Then there was the adoration of the dear Queen's birthday. She got so many presents, she could not rip them open fast enough. Dr. Luz presented lovely little trinkets to her on her birthday. He knew she liked adding pretty things to her collections. He was clever. Maybe he was too clever. Her rash itched and her filmed eyes narrowed. He told her he was working on something extra special, something about the School of Scholars. She yawned. Those decrepit simians. Why did she continue to fund their research? They were barely capable of keeping their wigs on their heads. It was reported one nodded off during the pageant of progress. He should be shipped to the camps for that transgression. Annoying. The celebration of the eve of the time of congregation was her favorite. Maybe. There was the feast followed by the procession to the royal arena, where the mass displays were performed. In the arena, the lights would burn all night. Burn. The word irritated her blasted rash. All the bounties of the land were prepared for the assembled courtiers at the celebration. Everyone ate what was sweetest to them. Not that anything ever agreed with her. Her constitution was delicate. Stews and puddings were nasty. She preferred something wet and dead to slide down her throat. But then the arena, that was something to enjoy. Thousands of her royal subjects gathered just to show their love and devotion to her, their dear queen. The demonstrations, the fantasies, the fireworks, the singing were all for her. She hissed. Were any of them taking her things? Maybe someone wanted that spare piece of rope. She's particularly fond of that piece of rope. She could see how someone might covet it. She would have the people searched, coming and going to make sure no one was taking anything of hers. She turned her head to a brown leather and whispered a command. As he ran to obey, another took his place at her wheelchair so that her progress to the great hall was not delayed. I am, I am, I am, I am, I am, I am, only me. I am alone. I require what is mine. I take what is mine. I will have it. I will keep it. Me, only me. She belched. The brown leathers wheeled the bulbous burden to a large balcony. She prided herself on her encyclopedic knowledge of all her possessions. She possessed everything. She leaned over the railing. The court was assembling below. The music began. Ah, there she was. She could see herself entering the grand hall now. All eyes turned to her. Courtiers bowed as she passed. She gracefully picked her way through the collections while nodding to her adoring subjects. She was beautiful. She was poised. She was perfect. The blue gown was exquisite. The flowing gold ribbons and the diamond crown caught every flicker of light. I look beautiful. I am slender. I am young. Still, maybe brown curls would be nice for a change. I am, I am, I am. I am, I am, I am. Only me. I am alone. I require what is mine. I take what is mine. I will have it. I will keep it. Me, only me. She hissed. 49. As the orchestra played the theme for the eve of the time of congregation, privileged members of the court scampered to perches atop barrels or park their delicate backsides on towers of trunks padded by rags. All the good spots were scouted months ahead. Proximity to the dear queen and reserving a stable seat was a rather complicated calculus, but all were soon seated to varying degrees of satisfaction. The feast began with a parade of fantastic delicacies. There was a bit of shifting around collections and a bit of lifting over stacks, but one by one culinary creations were paraded through the great hall to good effect. An immense cage of marzipan with stuffed jungle birds led the procession. Next came a molded aspic of a red python locked in a death spiral with a black gyral. Then came the obligatory stuffed peacock. For many in the crowd, the grand bird was a traditional favorite since the same one appeared every year. Next, 6 men carried a huge stuffed sow on a plank, followed by trays of pickled pink piglets. Finally, fish stuck on the ends of tall pikes were carried through like great banners. Thunderous applause followed each presentation. None of this was meant for eating. A rolling fountain of blue liquor entered the great hall. It was considered quite proper to jump off one's perch, grab a glass, plunge it into the fountain, and proclaim the dear queen's health before gulping the spirits in one shot. This really got the party started. Tattered servants then handed round trays of food: spiced rabbit, golden leeks, kivy of hare, chicken pasties, pike and galantine, fried figs, creamed fish, capon crowned with quail eggs, cherry pottage, mixed pickles, mushroom patties, bucknard, rose pudding, and grape pie were distributed. This caused even louder hosannas to be raised in the praise of the dear queen. Everything was as expected. Everything proceeded as tradition dictated. That is when the dear queen spotted the black spider. She saw it lurking along the edge of the great hall, edging its way closer to Tirzah. Distracted from the sameness of the celebration, she wondered at its purpose. It was carrying something in its long arms. Ah, yes, that spider had a name. She remembered it. Skiva. As the name crystallized in her mind, the spider jumped before the white blonde sitting on the throne. Skiva was presenting a gift to her. The dear queen loved ripping open gifts. She leaned over the railing, watching this unexpected presentation, and drooled. 50. As Tirzah entered the great hall, she acknowledged the cheers of the crowd. From the throne, she witnessed the subtleties parade past her. She watched faces of courtiers grow red from blue liquor. Doctrine of the land taught the dear queen was so pure, she only needed the air she breathed and the love of her people to exist. Her stomach grew tight as she watched others eat and drink. She closed her eyes. If she could not eat food, she did not want to see food being eaten. Tirzah felt someone mounting the platform. She opened her eyes to see a man handing her something. Was this a new ceremony? Was it one of the keeper's baby dolls? This doll was not covered in jewels, but dressed in gray wool. Not sure what to do, Tirzah did what seemed most natural and took the bundle into her arms. Eyes turned to the drama at the throne. The man, as thin as a stick, backed away, bowing as he went. People stopped drinking. People stopped eating. The music faded as even the musicians leaned over the railing to see what was happening at the throne. The stick figure lifted his skinny arms, gathering every eye to himself. His voice filled the great hall. Dear Queen, the wonder of our universe, dear Queen, all wise and all noble, dear Queen, the envy of the known world, dear Queen, for you and you alone, I, Skiva, your most loyal slave, am presenting on this, the eve of the time of congregation, the rare jewel I was commissioned by all the court to procure for your majesty. From the far reaches of your land, I traversed floods and forests, mountains and caves. I endured months of privation and drove myself to the brink of abject poverty to bring you this child, this living child. Skiva swept into a magnificent bow. He finished with the horsey teeth flashing to the upper balconies. It was quite a contortion. His back handled the big moment just fine. His mother would have been proud. Tirza looked into the thin face of a little girl. I am hungry, whispered a small voice. Visions of the privation Tirza suffered on her journey to Tophet flashed before her. She understood the gray, pinched look on the child's face. Bring me food, ordered Tirza. Bring me a glass of good wine. The dear Queen's mirror had never spoken from the throne before. The entire assembly froze. No one knew what to do. Bring me a plate of food, demanded Tirza. Now. She was obeyed. The dear Queen, sitting far above, was quite taken by the drama. How exciting! Something new was happening. The brown leathers and the grand courtiers looked anxiously at the rash red face of the dear Queen. Would she order them to seize the girl? Would she order the mirror to the camps for speaking from the throne? What should they do? They did not know what to do, so they did nothing. Helping the little girl to sit upright, Tirza gave the child a morsel of bread soaked in red wine. A tattered servant offered a golden spoon and held a plate of food. Silence reigned in the great hall while a child ate. This is just how I imagined, whispered the child, resting in Tirza's arms. I imagined you would have a golden spoon. Maybe there would be ladies dressed in beautiful gowns surrounding you. Maybe they would serve me sugar candies and frosted cakes. Skiva said I would eat with the dear Queen tonight. And I am. You are beautiful. Who is Skiva? Too weak to lift her hand, the child used her eyes to indicate the man. What is your name? Faith. With the next bite, Faith's loose tooth fell out. Faith gazed at Tirza with a gap-toothed smile and opened her mouth for another bite. The dear Queen leaned over the railing, watching her mirror feed a little girl. As the novelty of the situation faded, she yawned, stretched her fangs, and spat. Slumping back in her wheelchair, she nodded to a brown leather. Play the professional, ordered the dear Queen. The command was relayed, and the music began. A collective sigh rose in the great hall. From elegant courtier to tattered servant, everyone knew what to do again. Whatever just happened with a small child left people without a script. Irregular, unsettling. By rank and in order, a procession formed. Torches were lit and passed from hand to hand. It was time for the arena. "Get me that Skiva," ordered the Deer Queen. "Haul him to my reception chamber at the arena." Thank you for listening. To hear more of the story, please come back soon, or you may purchase your own copy on Amazon. Just follow the link below. Until next time.